The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Captain James Morrison began his daily rounds. At 35, he had served the royal family for over a decade, his dedication unwavering and his loyalty absolute. Today felt different somehow, though he couldn't quite place why. The usual bustle of palace staff preparing for the day seemed muted, and an unusual tension hung in the air like morning mist. Princess Charlotte, now 16 and blossoming into a remarkable young woman, had always been James's favorite among the royal children. Not that he would ever admit such a thing aloud, but there was something special about her spirit, her genuine kindness, and the way she treated everyone around her with equal respect, regardless of their position. Unlike many of her peers, Charlotte never demanded attention or special treatment. Instead, she quietly observed the world around her with intelligent eyes that seemed older than her years. James remembered the day she was born, how the entire palace had buzzed with excitement. He was just a junior guard then, but he had been honored to stand watch during those precious first days. Now, 16 years later, he had watched her grow from a curious toddler who would peek around corners at the guards to a thoughtful teenager who often stopped to ask about their families and well-being. This particular morning, James noticed something was amiss almost immediately. Charlotte's usual cheerful demeanor was nowhere to be seen. During breakfast with her family, she barely touched her food, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate with disinterest. Her mother, the Princess of Wales, tried engaging her in conversation about upcoming engagements, but Charlotte's responses were short and distracted. James had positioned himself near the dining room entrance, as was protocol, but his trained eye caught every detail. Charlotte kept glancing toward the windows nervously, and when a staff member dropped a silver spoon, she jumped as if startled from deep thought. Her father noticed too, James could tell, but royal protocol often meant that family conversations happened behind closed doors, away from even the most trusted staff. After breakfast, Charlotte excused herself and headed toward her favorite spot in the palace gardens. James followed at a respectful distance, maintaining the security perimeter while giving her space to think. The gardens had always been her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the constant scrutiny that came with royal life. Today, however, instead of her usual purposeful walk among the rose bushes, she sat heavily on a stone bench, her shoulders slumped in a way that spoke of burdens too heavy for someone so young. James had seen many things during his years of service. He had protected the royal family through public events, private moments, and even minor crises. But something about Charlotte's demeanor today triggered every protective instinct he possessed. She wasn't just having a bad day or dealing with typical teenage troubles. This was different. This was fear. The autumn wind rustled through the carefully manicured hedges as James maintained his watchful position. He knew the difference between someone who was upset and someone who was genuinely afraid. Charlotte kept looking over her shoulder, scanning the garden paths as if expecting someone unwelcome to appear. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her phone, and, more than once, she started to dial a number before changing her mind and putting the device away. After nearly an hour of this internal struggle, Charlotte finally stood and walked directly toward James. This was unusual. While she was always friendly with the security staff, she rarely approached them during their duty hours unless there was a specific need. The protocol was clear: guards maintained a professional distance unless directly addressed or in case of emergency. "Captain Morrison," she said, her voice smaller than usual. "Could I speak with you privately? It's important." James immediately straightened, his training kicking in. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. Would you prefer to speak here or shall I escort you somewhere more secure?" Charlotte looked around the garden nervously. "Here is fine. But, please, I need you to promise me something. Whatever I tell you, you have to believe me. Everyone thinks I'm just being dramatic or imaginative, but I'm not. Something really happened, and I don't know who else to trust." The desperation in her voice made James's chest tighten. In all his years protecting the royal family, he had never heard such raw vulnerability from any of them. Charlotte was known for her composure, her ability to handle public scrutiny with grace beyond her years. Seeing her this shaken was deeply concerning. "You have my word, Your Royal Highness. I'm here to protect you, and that includes listening when you need someone to believe in you." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, though she fought to keep them from falling. It happened 3 days ago, during the charity event at the children's hospital. You remember, you were there too. James nodded. The event had been routine, one of many public appearances Charlotte made regularly. She had spent hours with sick children, reading stories and playing games. It had seemed like a perfectly normal royal engagement. There was a man there, Charlotte continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He said he was a photographer, but something about him felt wrong. He kept following me around, getting closer than the other media. When I was in the playroom with the children, he somehow got inside, past all the security checkpoints. James felt his blood run cold. He had been responsible for security coordination that day, and he was absolutely certain that all media personnel had been thoroughly vetted and assigned specific areas. No unauthorized individuals should have been able to access the children's ward. He approached me when I was alone for just a moment, when you and the other guards were checking the next room. He grabbed my wrist and said things, terrible things about what he wanted to do. He said he knew where I went to school, where I shopped, even where I walked my dog. He had been watching me for months. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. James felt a mixture of rage and professional failure wash over him. Someone had gotten close enough to threaten a member of the royal family under his watch, and he hadn't even known it happened. He said if I told anyone, he would hurt people I care about. Not just me, but my friends, even the palace staff. He knew names, Captain Morrison. He knew your name, and he knew about your daughter Emma starting university. He said he had been watching all of us. James's hands clenched into fists. The fact that this man knew about his family made the threat personal in a way that cut through all professional protocols. But, more importantly, it confirmed that this was not a random encounter or a case of Charlotte's imagination. This was a calculated threat from someone who had been conducting surveillance for an extended period. Why didn't you tell anyone immediately? James asked gently, though he suspected he already knew the answer. I tried, Charlotte said, tears finally spilling over. I told my security detail right after it happened, but they said they had no record of any unauthorized personnel. They checked the media list, and everyone was accounted for. They said I must have misunderstood someone's intentions or maybe gotten confused in all the excitement. James felt sick. He knew the guards who had been on duty that day, and, while they were competent, they sometimes focused more on visible threats than subtle ones. The idea that they had dismissed Charlotte's concerns as teenage imagination was infuriating. I told my parents too, but they were dealing with some diplomatic crisis, and when the initial security report showed nothing unusual, they assumed it was stress from my upcoming exams. My mother suggested I talk to the palace counselor about managing anxiety. The picture was becoming clearer and more troubling by the moment. Charlotte had been failed by every system designed to protect her, leaving her to carry this burden alone for 3 days while her fear grew and her trust in those around her diminished. But, yesterday, he contacted me again, Charlotte continued, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. He sent this. She showed James a message from an unknown number. The text was brief but chilling. Beautiful day for a walk in Hyde Park. See you soon, princess. Remember what I told you about keeping secrets? Attached was a photo that made James's heart stop. It showed Charlotte from the previous afternoon, walking with her friends near Speaker's Corner. The angle and distance suggested it had been taken with a telephoto lens from across the street, but the clarity was unmistakable. Someone was indeed watching her, tracking her movements, and had the skill and equipment to do so without being noticed. That's when I knew I had to tell someone who would believe me, Charlotte said. I've watched you for years, Captain Morrison. You notice everything. You care about people as individuals, not just as duties to perform. I need someone who will take this seriously and help me figure out what to do. James looked at the photograph again, his mind racing through protocols and possibilities. This was far more serious than a simple threat or case of mistaken identity. This appeared to be organized stalking by someone with significant resources and knowledge of royal routines. The fact that he had bypassed security at the hospital suggested either inside knowledge or professional training. Your Royal Highness, you were absolutely right to come to me. This is a credible threat, and we need to address it immediately. But I need you to trust me completely and follow my instructions exactly. Can you do that? Charlotte nodded eagerly, relief flooding her features for the first time in days. Yes, absolutely. What do we do? First, we're going to document everything you remember about both encounters. Every detail, no matter how small it might seem. Then, we're going to implement some immediate security changes while we investigate. And, most importantly, we're going to make sure your parents understand the real nature of what's happening. James was already formulating a plan in his mind. He would need to involve Counter-Terrorism Command, review all security footage from the hospital, and conduct a thorough investigation of everyone who had access to that event. But his immediate priority was ensuring Charlotte's safety and making sure she felt protected and believed. "Thank you," Charlotte whispered. "I was starting to think maybe I was going crazy, that maybe I had imagined everything." "You're not crazy, and your instincts are spot on. Trusting those instincts may have just saved your life." As they walked back toward the palace, James was already mentally preparing for the conversations ahead. He would need to convince his supervisors that this threat was real and immediate, despite the lack of initial evidence. He would need to coordinate with multiple security agencies while maintaining the discretion necessary for royal protection. Most importantly, he would need to ensure that Charlotte never again felt alone or unbelieved when facing danger. The afternoon sun was beginning to set as they reached the palace steps, but James knew this was just the beginning of what would likely be a very long night. Charlotte had taken a brave step in trusting him with the truth, and he was determined not to let her down. Whatever it took, whoever this man was, James would make sure he never got close to Princess Charlotte again. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a familiar coat. This was why he had chosen this career, why he had dedicated his life to protecting others. In this moment, looking at Charlotte's hopeful but still frightened face, he knew that everything he had trained for had led to this point. The real work was just beginning. The emergency security meeting convened at 7 that evening in the palace's most secure conference room. James had spent the afternoon carefully documenting Charlotte's account and gathering what preliminary evidence he could find. The room was filled with serious faces: the head of royal protection, representatives from Counter-Terrorism Command, the palace's security coordinator, and James himself. Notably absent were Charlotte's parents, who were attending a state dinner and wouldn't return until late evening. James began by presenting Charlotte's detailed account, emphasizing the specific nature of the threats and the photographic evidence. As he spoke, he watched the faces around the table carefully. Some showed immediate concern, while others maintained expressions of polite skepticism. The head of Royal Protection, Commander Sarah Bennett, had worked with James for years and knew him to be thorough and reliable. The initial response team found no evidence of unauthorized access, Commander Bennett said, reviewing the hospital security report. All media personnel were accounted for, and the security sweep found nothing unusual. "With respect, ma'am," James replied, "I believe we need to consider that this individual may have had legitimate credentials or assistance from someone with access. The level of detail about palace routines and personal information suggests extensive surveillance and possibly insider knowledge." Detective Chief Inspector Michael Davies from Counter-Terrorism Command leaned forward. "Captain Morrison, while we take all threats against the royal family seriously, we need to be careful not to create panic based on what might be misinterpreted interactions. Teenagers, even royal ones, sometimes perceive threats where none exist." James felt his patience wearing thin, but he maintained his professional composure. "Sir, I've worked with Princess Charlotte for most of her life. She's not prone to dramatics or misinterpretation. The photographic evidence alone should be enough to warrant a full investigation." He passed around copies of the Hyde Park photograph, watching as the skeptical expression slowly changed to ones of concern. The image quality and angle clearly indicated professional surveillance equipment and techniques. "This changes things," Commander Bennett admitted. "This level of surveillance capability suggests we're dealing with someone with significant resources and training." "Detective Chief Inspector, what's your assessment?" DCI Davies studied the photograph carefully, his expression growing more serious by the moment. "The equipment used here is professional grade, probably costing several £1,000s. The positioning suggests the photographer was comfortable operating in a high-security area for an extended period. This isn't amateur stalking behavior. For the next 2 hours, the team developed a comprehensive response plan. They would review all security footage from the hospital and surrounding areas, conduct background checks on everyone who had access to that day's event, and implement enhanced protection protocols for Charlotte. Most importantly, they agreed to take Charlotte's accounts seriously and treat this as a credible threat. Meanwhile, Charlotte sat in her private study, trying to focus on homework but finding it impossible to concentrate. Every sound in the corridors outside made her look up nervously. She kept checking her phone, both dreading and expecting another message from her stalker. The relief she had felt after speaking with Captain Morrison was beginning to fade, replaced by anxiety about what would happen next. Her lady-in-waiting, Mrs. Patricia Holloway, knocked softly on the door. "Your Royal Highness, your parents have returned from the state dinner. They've asked to see you in the blue drawing room." Charlotte's stomach clenched. She knew that Captain Morrison would have briefed them by now, but she wasn't sure how they would react. Her previous attempts to explain the situation had been met with concern but also skepticism. She hoped that the new evidence would make them understand the seriousness of the threat. The blue drawing room was one of the more formal spaces in the palace, used primarily for important conversations and small diplomatic meetings. When Charlotte entered, she found her parents waiting with expressions of deep concern. Captain Morrison was also present, along with Commander Bennett. "Charlotte, darling," her mother said, rising to embrace her. "Captain Morrison has told us everything. I'm so sorry we didn't listen properly before. We should have taken your concerns more seriously from the beginning." Her father, typically more reserved in his emotional expressions, looked visibly shaken. "The important thing now is keeping you safe while we find this individual. Commander Bennett has assured us that every resource will be dedicated to this investigation." Charlotte felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time in days, she felt like the adults in her life were truly listening and taking action. "What happens now?" she asked. Commander Bennett stepped forward. "Starting immediately, we're implementing enhanced security protocols. You'll have additional protection officers, and we're modifying your schedule to eliminate any predictable patterns. We're also working with technology specialists to trace the source of the messages you received. We've contacted your school as well," her mother added. "They'll be increasing security measures there, though we've been discreet about the reasons. Your friends and teachers won't know the specific details." Charlotte nodded, understanding the balance between safety and maintaining some semblance of normal life. "What about the investigation? How will you find him?" James spoke up for the first time since Charlotte had entered the room. "We're reviewing all security footage from the hospital and surrounding areas. We're also analyzing the photograph he sent to determine what equipment was used and potentially trace it back to specific sources. Additionally, we're conducting thorough background checks on everyone who had access to the hospital event." Most importantly, DCI Davies added, having just arrived from the security briefing, "We want you to know that you did exactly the right thing by coming forward. Your detailed account and the evidence you preserved may be crucial in catching this individual before he escalates his behavior." The conversation continued for another hour, covering practical security measures and emotional support resources. Charlotte's parents were clearly struggling with the balance between protecting their daughter and allowing her to maintain some independence. The threat represented every parent's nightmare, magnified by the unique challenges of royal life. As the meeting concluded, James requested a private moment with Charlotte. "Your Royal Highness, I want you to know that I'll be personally overseeing your security detail for the foreseeable future. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, I want you to tell me immediately. No concern is too small." "Captain Morrison," Charlotte said, "I know I keep saying this, but thank you. If you hadn't believed me. There's no need to thank me. This is what we're here for. But I do need you to promise me something. No more trying to handle things alone. If he contacts you again, if you see anything suspicious, if you just feel uneasy about something, you tell me right away. Promise?" "I promise." Over the next few days, the investigation began to yield results. Analysis of the hospital's security system revealed a sophisticated hack that had allowed someone to loop pre-recorded footage during a 15-minute window, effectively creating a blind spot in the surveillance system. This confirmed that they were dealing with someone with significant technical skills and resources. The photograph analysis was equally revealing. The equipment used was professional grade, and the digital signature suggested it had been taken with a camera that was purchased from a high-end photography store in London just 3 weeks before the hospital event. Investigators were now working to trace the purchase through credit card records and store security footage. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of additional surveillance. A review of security footage from various locations where Charlotte regularly appeared revealed the same individual in multiple photos, always maintaining distance but consistently present. The pattern went back several months, indicating a level of premeditation that made everyone involved extremely concerned. Charlotte tried to maintain her normal routine as much as possible, but the enhanced security measures were a constant reminder of the threat. Extra guards accompanied her to school, sweeps were conducted of any location she planned to visit, and her movements were carefully coordinated to avoid predictable patterns. The psychological impact was significant. Charlotte found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds, and struggling to sleep. The palace arranged for her to speak with a specialist in trauma counseling, someone experienced in helping individuals cope with stalking and threats. The most important thing to remember, Dr. Elizabeth Warren explained during their first session, is that you are not at fault for any of this. You didn't cause it, and you couldn't have prevented it. What you can control is how you respond and recover. Charlotte appreciated the counseling, but she found herself most comforted by the steady presence of Captain Morrison and his team. Their professional competence and genuine concern helped her feel protected while they worked to resolve the situation. A week after the investigation began, James received an urgent call from DCI Davies. "Captain Morrison, we need you at Scotland Yard immediately. We've identified our suspect, and there are some details you need to see before we proceed with the arrest." James arranged for Commander Bennett to personally oversee Charlotte's security and made his way to Scotland Yard, his mind racing with possibilities. After days of painstaking investigation, they were finally close to answers. The briefing room at Scotland Yard was filled with evidence boards covered in photographs, timeline charts, and technical analysis reports. DCI Davies began immediately. His name is Marcus Thornfield, age 34, former military intelligence officer discharged 3 years ago for psychological instability. He's been unemployed since then, but he's been living comfortably, suggesting either savings or financial support from unknown sources. James studied the photographs of Thornfield, a nondescript man who could easily blend into crowds. What's his background with the royal family? That's where it gets interesting and concerning. During his military service, he worked on several security assessments for royal events. He has extensive knowledge of protection protocols and potential vulnerabilities. His discharge came after he became obsessed with a female colleague and was found to be conducting unauthorized surveillance. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that was both clearer and more frightening than James had hoped. So he has inside knowledge of our procedures and a history of stalking behavior. What about the hospital event? We found evidence that he obtained press credentials using a fake identity. The background check process has some gaps when it comes to freelance photographers, and he exploited that weakness. He's been planning this for months, possibly since his military discharge. James felt a cold anger building inside him. This man had used his military training and knowledge of royal security to systematically terrorize a 16-year-old girl. The betrayal of trust was as infuriating as the threat itself. Where is he now? Are we ready to make an arrest? DCI Davies's expression grew grim. That's the problem. We've located his last known address, but he cleared out 2 days ago. We found evidence of extensive surveillance equipment and detailed plans of various royal locations. He knew we were getting close, and he's disappeared. The investigation had reached a critical turning point. They knew who they were looking for, but their suspect was now on the run, potentially more dangerous than ever. James realized that Charlotte's ordeal was far from over, and the real test of his protection abilities was about to begin. The news that Marcus Thornfield had vanished sent shockwaves through the royal protection team. James returned to the palace immediately, his mind churning through the implications of hunting a former military intelligence officer who knew their procedures and capabilities. This was no longer just a stalking case, it had become a manhunt for someone with the skills and knowledge to potentially cause serious harm. Commander Bennett called an emergency meeting for all senior protection officers. The atmosphere in the secure briefing room was tense as James shared what he had learned at Scotland Yard. The revelation that their stalker was a trained intelligence operative with inside knowledge of royal security protocols changed everything about their defensive strategy. "We need to assume that Thornfield knows our standard operating procedures," Commander Bennett said grimly. "He'll anticipate our normal security measures, which means we need to think outside our usual playbook." James had been considering this exact problem during his drive back from Scotland Yard. "I recommend we implement irregular protocols, random changes to routines, unexpected security measures, and personnel he wouldn't have encountered during his military service. We need to make ourselves unpredictable." The team spent the next several hours redesigning Charlotte's protection strategy from the ground up. Instead of the traditional approach of securing fixed routes and locations, they would create constantly shifting patterns that would be impossible for Thornfield to anticipate or counter. It was more complex and resource-intensive, but, given the threat level, no expense would be spared. Meanwhile, Charlotte was in her private sitting room with her mother, trying to process the news that her stalker was a former military professional who had been planning his campaign against her for months. The revelation that he had been watching her long before the hospital incident made her feel sick. "I keep thinking about all the times I felt like someone was watching me," Charlotte said quietly. "There were days when I would turn around expecting to see someone, but there was never anyone there. I thought I was being paranoid." Her mother reached over to squeeze her hand. "You weren't paranoid. Your instincts were protecting you. The important thing is that we know who we're dealing with now, and we can plan accordingly." "But he's gone, hasn't he? He could be anywhere, planning anything." The Princess of Wales chose her words carefully. She wanted to be honest with Charlotte while not increasing her fear unnecessarily. "He's somewhere we can't see him right now, but that doesn't mean we can't find him. Captain Morrison and the police have resources and capabilities that Thornfield probably doesn't expect." Charlotte nodded, but her mother could see the fear in her eyes. This situation had already stolen too much of her daughter's sense of security and normal teenage life. The Princess of Wales made a mental note to speak with the palace counselors about additional support resources. That evening, James implemented the first phase of the new security protocol. Charlotte's usual evening routine was completely changed. Instead of studying in her regular room, she was moved to a different location each hour, with security teams conducting sweeps ahead of each move. It was disruptive and inconvenient, but it made any surveillance or attack planning nearly impossible. Dr. Warren, the trauma specialist, visited Charlotte again that evening to help her cope with the escalating situation. "It's natural to feel overwhelmed when a threat becomes more complex," she explained. "But remember that knowledge is power. Knowing who you're dealing with allows the people protecting you to be more effective." "It doesn't feel like power," Charlotte admitted. "It feels like I'm trapped in my own home, and he's still out there somewhere, watching and waiting." That feeling is understandable and valid. But consider this: every hour that passes while you're safely protected is an hour that the investigation gets closer to finding him. Time is on your side now, not his. James appreciated Dr. Warren's approach. She wasn't minimizing Charlotte's fears or offering false reassurances. Instead, she was helping Charlotte understand the strategic reality of their situation while providing tools for managing the emotional impact. The investigation, meanwhile, had expanded into a full-scale operation involving multiple agencies. Thornfield's military background meant that his case was now being handled as a potential national security matter. His access to classified information about royal protection procedures made him a unique and dangerous threat. Detective Superintendent Robert Hayes, one of Scotland Yard's most experienced investigators, had been assigned to lead the manhunt. He briefed James on the expanded investigation during a late-night meeting at the palace. "We're treating this as a Priority 1 case," Superintendent Hayes explained. "We have teams checking every known associate from his military service, reviewing financial records to understand how he's been supporting himself, and monitoring all forms of communication that might give us a lead on his location." "What about international concerns?" James asked.
With his intelligence background, is there any possibility he might try to leave the country? We've coordinated with border security and international partners. His passport has been flagged, and we're monitoring transportation hubs. However, someone with his training might have access to alternative documentation or routes. The conversation was interrupted by James's secure phone ringing. Commander Bennett's voice was tight with urgency. "James, we need you in the control room immediately. We've received another communication." James excused himself and hurried to the palace's security control room, where Commander Bennett and several technicians were gathered around multiple monitors. On the main screen was a new message that had been sent to Charlotte's phone just minutes earlier. "Running and hiding won't protect her forever. I know every trick you people use. She belongs to me, and I'll have her soon. The little princess has grown up beautifully, hasn't she? Soon we'll be together, just like I've always planned." The message was accompanied by another photograph, this one clearly taken from outside the palace grounds. It showed Charlotte's bedroom window, with a light on inside, taken sometime within the last few hours. Thornfield was not only still watching, he was close enough to conduct active surveillance of the palace itself. "How is this possible?" James demanded. "We have continuous perimeter security." The senior technician, Sarah Chen, pulled up the palace's external security grid on an adjacent monitor. "Sir, our system is designed to detect physical intrusion, but someone with telephoto equipment could potentially take photographs from well beyond our detection range. The technical quality of this image suggests he's using military-grade surveillance equipment." James studied the photograph, his mind racing through defensive possibilities. If Thornfield could observe the palace from outside their security perimeter, traditional protection methods would be insufficient. They needed to think beyond conventional approaches. "We need to consider relocating Princess Charlotte temporarily," he said finally. "If he can observe the palace, we need to move her somewhere he can't predict or watch." Commander Bennett nodded grimly. "I was thinking the same thing. But where would be secure enough while still allowing her to maintain some normal activities?" "The Royal Naval College at Greenwich," James suggested after a moment's thought. "It's a secure facility, it's not typically associated with royal residences, and the military security would be familiar to our team but potentially unexpected to Thornfield." The idea had merit. The Royal Naval College was a working military facility with its own security protocols, but it also had residential accommodations that could house Charlotte and a protection team. More importantly, it represented a complete break from her normal routine that would be difficult for Thornfield to anticipate. Charlotte's parents were woken and briefed on the new development. The decision to relocate their daughter was not taken lightly, but the photograph of her bedroom window made it clear that remaining at the palace was no longer safe. "How long would she need to stay there?" her father asked during the emergency meeting. "Until we locate and arrest Thornfield," James replied honestly. "It could be days, or it could be longer. But every hour she remains predictable is an hour he can use to plan against us." Charlotte took the news of her temporary relocation with remarkable composure, though James could see the strain showing in her face. "Will I be able to continue with school?" she asked. "We'll arrange for your teachers to provide materials, and you'll have tutoring support," her mother assured her. "The most important thing is keeping you safe until this situation is resolved." The relocation was planned for the early morning hours, when movement would be least expected and surveillance would be most difficult. Multiple decoy vehicles would leave the palace at different times, while Charlotte would be transported in an unmarked van that was not part of the regular royal fleet. As James coordinated the complex logistics of the move, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still reacting rather than controlling the situation. Thornfield had forced them to abandon the palace, to disrupt Charlotte's life, and to operate in a defensive mode. Somehow, they needed to regain the initiative. Dr. Warren spent the evening helping Charlotte prepare mentally for the temporary relocation. "Change can be empowering," she explained. "You're not running away, you're taking control of your environment to make yourself safer." "It doesn't feel like control," Charlotte admitted. "It feels like he's winning. Consider this, every move you make now is one he can't predict. Every precaution you take is one that makes his plans more difficult. You're not giving him power, you're taking it away from him."
As the night wore on, the palace bustled with quiet but urgent activity. Security teams conducted final sweeps, logistics coordinators arranged the complex transportation plan, and intelligence officers continued their round-the-clock search for any trace of Thornfield's location. James found himself in Charlotte's sitting room just before midnight, conducting one final security briefing before the morning relocation. She was calmer than he had expected, though he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Your Royal Highness, I know this is incredibly difficult and disruptive. But I want you to know that every person working on this case is dedicated to bringing this situation to a resolution as quickly as possible." "Captain Morrison, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course. Do you think he'll actually try to hurt me, or is this all just intimidation?" James considered his answer carefully. Charlotte deserved honesty, but he also needed to maintain her emotional stability. Based on his background and the escalating nature of his communications, we have to assume he represents a serious physical threat. That's why we're taking these precautions. But remember, he's now operating as a fugitive, which limits his resources and options considerably. Charlotte nodded, understanding the careful balance in his response. "Thank you for not treating me like a child. This is my life, and I deserve to know what we're really facing." As James left her room that evening, he felt a deep admiration for Charlotte's courage and maturity. Despite everything she was facing, she continued to handle herself with grace and wisdom. His determination to protect her had become deeply personal, extending far beyond professional duty. The clock was approaching midnight as final preparations were completed for the morning relocation. James knew that the next few days would be crucial in determining the outcome of this crisis. Somewhere out there, Marcus Thornfield was planning his next move. James was determined to ensure that whatever Thornfield was planning, they would be ready for him. The pre-dawn relocation to the Royal Naval College went exactly as planned. Charlotte was transported in an unmarked vehicle while multiple decoy convoys left the palace at staggered intervals. By 6 a.m, she was safely installed in a secure residential building within the college grounds, surrounded by both royal protection officers and military security personnel. The change of environment seemed to lift Charlotte's spirits somewhat. The Naval College was beautiful, with historic buildings overlooking the Thames, and the presence of young naval officers going about their training provided a sense of normal activity that had been missing from the tense atmosphere at the palace. James established a command center in an adjacent building, coordinating with both the ongoing investigation and the college's security staff. The arrangement allowed for flexible protection protocols while maintaining communication with all relevant agencies involved in the manhunt for Thornfield. On the second day of Charlotte's stay at Greenwich, the investigation finally caught a significant break. Superintendent Hayes called James with news that would change everything about their approach to the case. "We've located Thornfield's vehicle," Hayes reported. It was found abandoned in a parking garage in South London, but the forensics team discovered something interesting inside. "He's been living rough, possibly sleeping in the car, and he's clearly been struggling more than we expected." The evidence suggested that Thornfield's resources were more limited than they had feared. Personal items found in the vehicle indicated that he was under significant stress, possibly even experiencing a psychological breakdown that was affecting his operational capabilities. More importantly, Hayes continued, "We found detailed plans that suggest he's been trying to get close to Princess Charlotte at the Naval College. He knows about the relocation, but his plans indicate he doesn't fully understand the security arrangements there." This news was both concerning and encouraging. Concerning because it confirmed that Thornfield was actively planning an approach, but encouraging because his intelligence appeared to be incomplete. The Naval College's security was different from royal protection protocols, and Thornfield's military background might actually work against him if he was expecting familiar procedures. James immediately convened a strategy meeting with all security personnel. "We have an opportunity here," he explained to the assembled team. "Thornfield is planning to make a move, but he's working with incomplete information. We can use that to our advantage." The plan they developed was risky but potentially decisive. Instead of continuing to react defensively, they would create a controlled opportunity for Thornfield to approach, while ensuring Charlotte's safety through layers of hidden protection and carefully planned responses. Charlotte was briefed on the new strategy that afternoon. James was careful to explain both the potential risks and the extensive safeguards that would be in place to protect her. Essentially, we're going to let him think he has an opportunity to approach you, but we'll be controlling every aspect of the situation, James explained. You'll never actually be in danger, but he won't know that. Charlotte listened carefully to the plan, asking thoughtful questions about timing and contingencies. So I would be like, bait, she asked finally. That's a harsh way to put it, but essentially yes. However, you would be bait that's completely protected, in a situation where we control all the variables.
And this would end it? If we catch him this way, it's over?
Yes, Your Royal Highness. This would allow us to arrest him and end the threat permanently. Charlotte was quiet for several minutes, considering the proposal. James watched her carefully, ready to accept whatever decision she made. The plan required her active participation, and he wouldn't proceed without her complete agreement. I want to do it, Charlotte said finally.
I'm tired of running and hiding. If this can end it, then let's end it. The operation was scheduled for the following afternoon.
Charlotte would take a seemingly routine walk through the college grounds, following a path that would take her briefly away from the main buildings. Hidden security teams would be positioned throughout the area, and backup units would be standing by just out of sight. That evening, Charlotte called her parents to discuss the plan. They were understandably nervous about the risks involved, but they also understood their daughter's need to regain some control over her situation.
We trust Captain Morrison's judgment, her father said during the secure video call.
If he believes this is the safest way to resolve the situation, then we support it. Just promise me you'll be careful, her mother added. Remember that you have people who love you and are doing everything possible to keep you safe.
I promise, Mum.
And I want you to know that Captain Morrison and his team have been incredible. I feel safe with them, even in this situation.
James spent most of that night reviewing every detail of the operational plan.
Contingencies were developed for multiple scenarios, communication protocols were established between all team members, and backup systems were tested and retested. By morning, he was confident that they had anticipated every possible variable. The day of the operation dawned clear and cold. Charlotte went through her normal morning routine, attended a tutoring session, and had lunch with some of the naval officers' wives who had been brought in to provide companionship and normalcy during her stay. To any observer, it appeared to be a routine day. At 2 p.m, Charlotte began her planned walk through the college grounds. She was accompanied by 2 protection officers at a discreet distance, while additional teams monitored from concealed positions throughout the area. James coordinated from the command center, maintaining communication with all units while tracking Charlotte's movement through multiple camera systems.
For the first 20 minutes, nothing unusual happened.
Charlotte walked the predetermined route, pausing occasionally to admire the river view or feed the ducks, playing her part perfectly while remaining alert for any signs of Thornfield's presence.
Then, at 2:23 p.m., one of the perimeter teams reported suspicious movement near the college's eastern entrance.
A man matching Thornfield's description had been observed watching Charlotte from a distance, using binoculars and moving between concealed positions. All units, this is Control, James spoke quietly into his radio.
We have a possible sighting.
Maintain positions and wait for my signal. Charlotte continued her walk, unaware of the drama unfolding around her. James watched through the security cameras as Thornfield moved closer, clearly planning to intercept her when she reached a more secluded section of the path. Target is moving toward the intercept point, reported the team leader positioned nearest to Thornfield. He appears to be alone and is carrying what looks like a small backpack.
James's pulse quickened.
This was the moment they had planned for, but the reality of watching a dangerous individual approach someone under his protection was intensely stressful. Every instinct told him to intervene immediately, but the plan required letting Thornfield get close enough to commit to an approach before they moved. Charlotte reached the predetermined point on her walk, a small gazebo overlooking the Thames that was partially hidden from the main college buildings.
She sat on a bench, ostensibly to enjoy the view, while actually following the script they had rehearsed. Thornfield emerged from his concealment and began walking directly toward the gazebo.
James could see him clearly now through the camera system, a disheveled man in his 30s, moving with purpose but also displaying signs of the psychological stress that the investigation had suggested.
All units, target is approaching Princess Charlotte.
Prepare to move on my signal, James commanded, his finger hovering over the radio button that would trigger the arrest teams. When Thornfield was still 50 yards away, he suddenly stopped and reached into his backpack. James's blood went cold as he realized that Thornfield might be armed, something they hadn't fully anticipated despite their preparations.
Move now. All units move now.
James shouted into the radio while simultaneously sprinting from the command center toward Charlotte's location. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Protection officers emerged from concealment around the gazebo, while arrest teams approached Thornfield from multiple directions. Charlotte, following her instructions perfectly, dropped to the ground behind the bench, putting solid cover between herself and any potential threat. Thornfield, suddenly, surrounded by armed officers, raised his hands but also began shouting incoherently.
She belongs to me. You don't understand. We're meant to be together. I've been watching her grow up. She needs me. James reached Charlotte's position just as the arrest teams secured Thornfield.
She was shaken but unharmed, and she managed a trembling smile when she saw James approaching.
Is it over? She asked quietly. Yes, Your Royal Highness. It's over.
The item Thornfield had been reaching for turned out to be not a weapon, but a collection of photographs and letters he had written to Charlotte over the months of his surveillance. The contents were disturbing, elaborate fantasies about their supposed relationship and detailed plans for kidnapping her, but they also provided clear evidence of his mental state and criminal intent. Thornfield was charged with multiple serious offenses including stalking, making threats against the royal family, and attempted kidnapping. The evidence collected during the investigation, combined with his own writings and the circumstances of his arrest, made conviction virtually certain. In the days following the arrest, Charlotte gradually returned to her normal routine. The transition back to the palace was managed carefully, with continued enhanced security until everyone was confident that Thornfield had been working alone. Psychological evaluation confirmed that he was suffering from severe delusions and would require extended treatment in a secure facility. Charlotte's recovery was remarkable. With the threat removed, she was able to process the trauma with Dr. Warren's continued support and gradually rebuild her sense of security and normalcy. She returned to school, resumed her royal duties, and slowly regained the confidence that had been shaken by months of unknown surveillance. James was commended for his handling of the crisis, both for his initial decision to take Charlotte's concerns seriously and for his management of the complex investigation and arrest operation. More importantly to him, Charlotte had emerged from the ordeal stronger and more resilient than before. 3 months later, Charlotte requested a private meeting with James in the palace gardens, the same location where she had first confided her fears about Thornfield. The autumn had turned to winter, and snow dusted the carefully maintained hedges and pathways. Captain Morrison, I wanted to thank you properly, Charlotte said as they walked along the familiar paths. Not just for protecting me, but for believing me when no one else did. I've learned a lot about myself during this whole experience. You showed remarkable courage throughout everything, Your Royal Highness. You should be proud of how you handled yourself. I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life, about how I want to serve when I'm older. This experience taught me about the importance of protecting people who can't protect themselves, about listening when someone asks for help. James smiled, understanding the direction of her thoughts. There are many ways to serve others and make a difference. I have no doubt that whatever path you choose, you'll excel at it. As they completed their walk, James reflected on the lessons learned from the case. The importance of taking all threats seriously, regardless of initial evidence. The value of listening to instincts and concerns, especially from those being threatened. The necessity of adapting security protocols to meet evolving threats. Most importantly, the reminder that behind every protection assignment was a human being deserving of safety, dignity, and respect. Charlotte had grown from a frightened teenager into a confident young woman who understood both her own strength and the value of trusting others when she needed help. The ordeal with Thornfield, while traumatic, had ultimately reinforced her natural resilience and compassion. The case of Marcus Thornfield became a study example in royal protection training, teaching future guards about the importance of taking stalking seriously and the complexities of protecting public figures from individuals with inside knowledge of security procedures. But, for James, it would always be remembered as the case where a brave young woman's trust in him led to justice and safety for everyone involved. Years later, when Charlotte had grown into her royal role and taken on significant public responsibilities, she would often credit the experience with Thornfield as formative in shaping her understanding of service and protection. The terror of being hunted had been transformed into wisdom about helping others who faced similar threats. James continued his career in royal protection, but he never forgot the lesson that sometimes the most important part of keeping people safe is simply listening when they tell you they're afraid. Charlotte's courage in speaking up had not only saved herself but had led to the arrest of someone who might have threatened others if he had remained free. The bond formed between protector and protected during those difficult months became one of mutual respect and trust that would endure throughout their continued service together. For James, it represented the best of what royal protection could be, not just physical security, but a partnership built on understanding, courage, and unwavering commitment to keeping good people safe in an uncertain world.